Dr. Vex Thornbottom adjusted his pristine lab coat and gazed out the observation deck of the research vessel Cosmic Curiosity, with the kind of smug satisfaction that only comes from having 3 advanced degrees and absolutely 0 practical experience. His elongated purple head bobbed as he reviewed his notes on what he generously called Earth's adorable wildlife collection. "Pip, my dear assistant," he called to the small, orange-scaled creature frantically checking containment readings nearby. "I do hope you're prepared to witness history in the making. Today, the Galactic Wildlife Institute will finally have proper documentation of these quaint little Earth creatures." Pip looked up from his tablet, his large eyes blinking nervously. "Dr. Thornbottom, sir, I've been reading the Earth databases, and some of these creatures have rather concerning behavioral patterns, especially the one they call a honey badger. The humans seem to have a saying about it not caring about—" "Pip, Pip, Pip," Vex interrupted with a condescending chuckle that would have made a kindergarten teacher proud. "You're letting primitive human folklore cloud your scientific judgment. I've studied predators from the methane swamps of Kepler 442b. I've cataloged the razor-toothed mountain crawlers of Proxima Centauri C. Trust me when I say these Earth animals are nothing more than evolutionary curiosities." The containment bay hummed with advanced alien technology, rows of transparent force field chambers housing various Earth animals. Most were sleeping or grooming themselves, looking about as threatening as a children's petting zoo. There were rabbits, squirrels, a few house cats, and in the corner a reinforced double containment unit that was making slightly more noise than the others. "Sir, about that reinforced unit," Pitt ventured, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had learned to expect disappointment. "The Earth files specifically mention that honey badgers are known for their ability to escape from reinforced containment for a creature that weighs less than my left tentacle." Vex laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a tornado. "The Institute's engineers clearly suffer from the same paranoid delusions as these humans. Look at it, Pip. It's barely larger than those fluffy rabbits." Through the transparent aluminum of the containment unit, a stocky black and white creature paced back and forth, with the kind of methodical determination that should have been a red flag to anyone with half a brain. Its small, dark eyes seemed to be studying the containment system with an intensity that was, frankly, unsettling. "Dr. Thornbottom?" Pip tried once more, his voice now carrying a slight tremor. "The Earth designation for this species includes warnings about its temperament, problem-solving abilities, and something called 0 Fs given. I think we should perhaps review the safety protocols before—" "Safety protocols!" Vex's laugh reached new heights of condescension. "My dear Pip, I once hand-fed an Andromedan spike wolf while it was molting. These Earth creatures are so docile, so harmless that human children keep them as companions. The only danger here is dying of boredom." The honey badger stopped pacing and looked directly at Vex through the containment field. For a moment their eyes met, and Pip swore he saw something that looked suspiciously like the creature was taking notes. "Now then," Vex continued, oblivious to the brewing storm, "let's prepare for tomorrow's presentation. The crew of the Cosmic Curiosity is expecting a proper scientific demonstration of Earth's wildlife, and I intend to show them exactly how overrated these so-called dangerous Earth predators really are." The honey badger tilted its head, almost as if it was listening. Then it returned to its pacing, but now there was something different about its movements, something that looked disturbingly like planning. Pip made a mental note to update his insurance policy. The next morning arrived with all the fanfare of a cosmic disaster waiting to happen. Dr. Vex Thornbottom had transformed the ship's main conference room into what he proudly called his Earth Wildlife Educational Experience, complete with portable containment units and a holographic display that kept glitching every few seconds. Captain Zara Stormwind sat in the front row, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and her expression suggesting she had better things to do than watch an alien zoologist play show and tell. The rest of the crew filed in with varying degrees of enthusiasm, ranging from mildly curious to openly skeptical. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted carbon-based life forms," Vex began with a flourish that would have made a circus ringmaster jealous. "Today I present to you the most overhyped collection of predators in the known galaxy. Behold, Earth's supposedly fearsome fauna." He gestured dramatically toward the first containment unit, where a small brown rabbit sat peacefully munching on what appeared to be space lettuce. This creature, known as a rabbit, is allegedly capable of reproducing at rates that concern human farmers. Yet observe its docile nature, its harmless appearance. Clearly, humans lack the proper perspective to evaluate actual threats. The rabbit looked up, twitched its nose, and went back to eating. The crew exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to question the educational value of this presentation. Moving on, Vex continued, now warming to his theme. We have the common house cat, supposedly a skilled hunter. He pointed to a gray tabby that was currently engaged in the highly threatening activity of grooming its paw. Notice how it prioritizes personal hygiene over establishing dominance, hardly the behavior of an apex predator. Captain Stormwind leaned forward slightly. Dr. Thornbottom, I've read some of the Earth riots. These animals may look harmless, but their behavioral patterns suggest— Captain, Vex interrupted with a wave of his hand. You're falling into the same trap as the humans. They've anthropomorphized these creatures, projecting their own anxieties onto perfectly ordinary animals. Trust me, I've studied predatory behavior across 17 different star systems. In the background, Pip was frantically checking his tablet while monitoring the containment systems. The power fluctuations had been getting worse all morning, and several warning lights were blinking in patterns that definitely weren't in the manual. Dr. Thornbottom, Pip whispered urgently, the containment grid is showing some instability. Perhaps we should postpone the demonstration until— Nonsense, Vex declared, loud enough for the entire room to hear. These containment fields could hold a Regelian battle rhino. A few Earth animals pose no challenge whatsoever. He moved to the next unit, where a squirrel was performing what could only be described as gymnastic feats with a small tree branch. This creature, the squirrel, is feared by humans for its ability to raid bird feeders and occasionally enter attics. Truly, a terrifying menace to galactic civilization. The squirrel paused mid-acrobatic routine and stared directly at Vex with the kind of intensity usually reserved for chess masters planning their next move. Then it resumed its gymnastics, but now with what looked suspiciously like increased aggression. Captain Stormwind's frown deepened. Doctor, I'm beginning to wonder if the Galactic Wildlife Institute's assessment methods might be flawed, Vex laughed, completely missing the diplomatic tone in her voice. My dear Captain, I assure you our methods are beyond reproach. In fact, let me show you our most dangerous specimen. He approached the reinforced containment unit in the corner, where the honey badger had been watching the proceedings with what Pip could only describe as malicious interest. The warning lights around the unit were blinking faster now, and a low humming sound was beginning to emanate from the power coupling. Behold, Vex announced with theatrical grandeur, the honey badger. According to Earth folklore, this creature doesn't care and possesses supernatural tenacity. Humans claim it can break through barriers, solve complex problems, and exhibits what they call weaponized stubbornness. Clearly, they've never encountered a real predator. The honey badger stopped pacing and looked directly at Vex. For a moment, the entire room fell silent. Then, as if on cue, the containment unit's warning klaxon began to sound. Dr. Thornbottom, Pip's voice cracked slightly. That's not supposed to be happening. The honey badger tilted its head, almost as if it was listening to the alarm. Then it did something that made everyone in the room extremely uncomfortable. It smiled. The honey badger's smile was the last thing anyone saw before the containment unit exploded in a shower of sparks that would have made a 4th of July fireworks display look like a birthday candle. The reinforced transparent aluminum didn't just crack. It disintegrated with the enthusiasm of a politician's campaign promises. What in the 7 moons of Zorbax just happened? Captain Stormwind shouted over the suddenly screaming alarms. But Dr. Vex Thornbottom was too busy watching his career prospects evaporate along with his credibility. The honey badger emerged from the smoking ruins of its prison like a furry black and white missile of pure determination. It paused for exactly 0.3 seconds to survey the room, and in that brief moment, everyone present got the distinct impression that it was taking inventory of exactly who needed to be taught a lesson about underestimating Earth wildlife. Now, Vex stammered, his previous confidence deflating faster than a punctured spacesuit. There's no need for alarm. It's just a small mammal. We can simply— The honey badger's response was to launch itself directly at the nearest piece of advanced alien technology, a holographic projector worth more than most planets' annual budgets. The device didn't just break. It exploded in a spectacular light show that temporarily blinded half the crew and somehow managed to project 3-dimensional images of what appeared to be the honey badger's middle finger. Somebody stop that thing! Vex shrieked, his voice reaching octaves that would have impressed an opera singer. But the honey badger was already moving to its next target, the main containment control panel. Pip dove for the emergency controls, his small orange form moving with surprising agility. "Dr. Thornbottom, the cascade failure is spreading. If it reaches the other containment units—" The honey badger reached the control panel first. Now, most creatures would have been confused by the array of alien buttons, switches, and holographic interfaces. The honey badger took one look at the setup and began pressing buttons with the systematic efficiency of a master hacker. Except, instead of accessing files, it was accessing freedom. "It can't possibly understand our technology," Vex protested, even as containment unit after containment unit began to fail in sequence. "It's just randomly pressing—" The squirrel burst free from its enclosure with a chittering sound that might have been laughter. It immediately began what could only be described as a parkour routine, bouncing off walls, swinging from ceiling fixtures, and somehow managing to knock over every piece of equipment it encountered. The gray tabby cat emerged with a yawn, took one look at the chaos, and decided this was the perfect time to start knocking things off tables, with the dedication of a professional. "This is impossible," Vex wailed, backing toward the door as the honey badger turned its attention to him personally. "Earth animals are supposed to be docile, harmless, evolutionarily inferior." The honey badger's expression suggested it had some strong opinions about evolutionary inferiority, and it was prepared to demonstrate them in the most educational way possible. It began stalking toward Vex with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for guided missiles. Captain Stormwind had seen enough. "Emergency lockdown, seal all sections. Someone get me a connection to the Galactic Wildlife Institute. I have some very pointed questions about their research methods." But the honey badger had apparently decided that emergency lockdowns were merely suggestions. It approached the reinforced door that was supposed to contain the chaos and began examining the locking mechanism with the focused attention of a master locksmith. Within seconds, it had identified the weak point in the alien engineering and began working on it with its claws. "That's a titanium steel composite, locked with quantum encryption," Pip squeaked in disbelief. "Nothing should be able to—" The door fell off its hinges with a crash that echoed through the entire ship. The honey badger looked back at the room full of stunned aliens and made a sound that might have been a chuckle. Then it disappeared into the corridor, followed by its newly liberated companions. "Dr. Thornbottom," Captain Stormwind's voice carried the kind of calm that preceded very large explosions. "Would you care to explain how a harmless Earth creature just single-handedly defeated our most advanced security systems?" Vex opened his mouth to respond, but the only sound that emerged was a strangled whimper. Through the destroyed doorway they could hear the distinctive sounds of expensive equipment being systematically demolished, punctuated by what sounded suspiciously like the honey badger humming a working song. "Sir," Pitt whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant crashes, "I think it's heading for the bridge." The color drained from Vex's face as he realized that his dismissive attitude toward Earth's wildlife had just unleashed something that apparently viewed advanced alien technology as nothing more than interesting toys to be taken apart. And somewhere in the distance, growing closer by the second, they could hear the honey badger's claws clicking against the metal floor with the rhythm of impending doom. The bridge of the Cosmic Curiosity was a marvel of galactic engineering, featuring defensive systems that could repel asteroid impacts, deflect plasma cannons, and withstand the gravitational pull of black holes. It was not, however, designed to handle one supremely irritated honey badger with a point to prove. Dr. Vex Thornbottom burst through the bridge doors like a man fleeing the apocalypse, which, considering the circumstances, wasn't entirely inaccurate. "Emergency! Code Red, deploy all defensive measures. There's a small Earth mammal loose on the ship." The bridge crew turned to stare at him with the kind of bewildered expressions usually reserved for people who claim to have been abducted by their own species. Commander Flux, the ship's tactical officer, slowly lowered his coffee cup and blinked his 4 eyes in sequence. "Sir, did you just say we need to deploy military-grade defenses against a mammal?" "Yes, no, maybe. Just activate everything," Vex shrieked, diving behind the captain's chair, as the distinctive sound of claws on metal grew louder in the corridor outside. Captain Stormwind arrived just in time to witness Vex's complete psychological breakdown. "Commander Flux, humor the good doctor. Activate Level 1 containment protocols." A series of energy barriers shimmered into existence across the bridge entrance, creating a wall of crackling blue energy that could theoretically stop a charging rhinoceros. The honey badger appeared in the doorway, took one look at the barrier, and tilted its head with the expression of someone who had just been presented with a mildly interesting puzzle. Vex emerged from behind the chair, his confidence returning with the backup of advanced technology. "Problem solved. The creature is contained by our superior—" The honey badger walked through the energy barrier like it was made of warm butter. The barrier flickered, sparked, and died with a sound like a deflating balloon. The creature paused on the other side, looked back at the deactivated barrier, and made a sound that definitely qualified as a snort of derision. "There he is," Commander Flux shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Deploy the quantum mesh." A new barrier materialized, this one glowing with an ominous red light and humming with enough energy to power a small city. The honey badger approached it with the casual interest of a tourist examining a museum exhibit. It reached out one claw, touched the barrier, and watched as the entire system overloaded and exploded in a shower of sparks that left scorch marks on the ceiling. "How is that possible?" Flux whispered, his training in advanced physics apparently not covering the section on Earth mammals and their relationship with the laws of nature. The honey badger's response was to turn its attention to the bridge's central computer console. The crew watched in horrified fascination as it began examining the various controls with the methodical approach of a professional technician. Within moments, it had identified the main power coupling and began working on it with surgical precision. "Stop it!" Vex screamed. "That's a quantum-encrypted, biometrically locked, titanium-reinforced..." The console exploded in a fountain of sparks and alien curse words. The honey badger looked pleased with its work and moved on to the next piece of equipment. "Deploy the stun cannons," Captain Stormwind ordered, her military training finally kicking in. "Maximum setting." The bridge's automated defense systems emerged from hidden panels, sleek weapons that could incapacitate a battalion of soldiers. They locked onto the honey badger and fired simultaneously, filling the air with crackling energy beams that would have dropped an elephant. The honey badger paused, looked mildly annoyed at the interruption, and continued its work. The stun beams seemed to have about as much effect as a gentle massage. "Sir," the weapons officer reported in a voice that suggested he was questioning his life choices, "the stun cannons are having no effect. It's like the creature is immune to electrical discharge." "Impossible," Vex protested. "Nothing is immune to directed energy weapons." The honey badger turned to look at him with an expression that clearly said, "Are you new here?" Then it approached the weapons systems and began dismantling them with the enthusiasm of a child opening birthday presents. "What about the gravitic restraints?" Commander Flux suggested desperately. "We could create a localized gravity field to immobilize it." The gravity generators hummed to life, creating a field intense enough to pin a grown alien to the deck. The honey badger noticed the increased gravity about as much as it might notice a slight breeze. It continued its systematic destruction of the bridge equipment, now with what appeared to be a slight bounce in its step. "This is insane," Captain Stormwind muttered, watching her state-of-the-art bridge being reduced to scrap metal by a creature that weighed less than her breakfast. "What kind of evolutionary pressure creates something like this?" The honey badger paused in its demolition work and looked up at her with an expression that might have been respect. Then it returned to its task, but now it seemed to be working around the essential life support systems. Almost like it understood that killing the crew wasn't the point, humiliation was. "The neural disruptors!" Vex shouted, grasping at his last hope. "Surely the neural disruptors will..." The honey badger had already found the neural disruptor controls and was in the process of rewiring them. Within seconds, the system activated, but instead of targeting the honey badger, it began playing what sounded suspiciously like Earth music throughout the ship's communication system. "Is that Don't Stop Me Now by Queen?" Pip asked, having finally caught up to the chaos. The honey badger looked up from its work and made a sound that was definitely approval. Then it returned to its systematic deconstruction of everything Vex had believed about the superiority of advanced alien technology. "Dr. Thornbottom," Captain Stormwind's voice carried the weight of dawning realization. "I think it's time you reconsidered your assessment of Earth's wildlife." But Vex was too busy staring at the honey badger, which had now somehow managed to hack into the ship's food replicators and was apparently ordering itself a snack. The creature looked back at him, and for just a moment Vex could swear he saw something that looked disturbingly like intellectual curiosity, as if the honey badger was studying him right back. The ship's cafeteria had been transformed into what could only be described as a fortress of fear. Dr. Vex Thornbottom had barricaded himself behind overturned tables, chairs, and anything else that might slow down 30 pounds of pure Earth determination. The honey badger sat calmly in the doorway, methodically eating what appeared to be a perfectly prepared alien fruit salad, while maintaining unbroken eye contact with the cowering zoologist. "Dr. Thornbottom," Pip whispered from behind his own makeshift barricade, "perhaps this would be a good time to reconsider your research methodology?" "Shut up, Pip!" Vex hissed back, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own terror-induced breathing. "I'm thinking..." The honey badger finished its fruit salad with the refined manners of someone who had never met a problem it couldn't solve through applied stubbornness. It then proceeded to examine the cafeteria's food preparation systems with the focused attention of a master chef, somehow managing to activate the coffee machine and pour itself what looked like a perfectly crafted cappuccino. "It's mocking us," Commander Flux observed from the safety of the corridor, watching through the doorway as the honey badger added what appeared to be cinnamon to its beverage. "That creature is literally mocking our entire civilization." Captain Stormwind stepped forward, her military bearing intact, despite the surreal nature of the situation. "Dr. Thornbottom, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your assessment of Earth's wildlife." "My assessment was perfectly accurate," Vex protested, though his voice lacked any of its earlier conviction. "The data clearly indicated that Earth animals are primitive, harmless, and evolutionarily inferior." The honey badger paused mid-sip of its cappuccino and fixed Vex with a look that could have melted titanium. Then it calmly set down its cup, walked over to the food replicator, and began what could only be described as a masterclass in advanced engineering. Within minutes, it had completely disassembled the replicator, identified the quantum resonance chamber, and begun rebuilding it into something that definitely wasn't in the original blueprints. The modified device hummed to life and produced what appeared to be a perfectly cooked steak dinner, complete with vegetables and a side of what looked suspiciously like honey. "Okay," Vex's voice cracked. That's actually quite impressive." The honey badger looked up from its engineering project with an expression that clearly said, "You think?" Then it returned to its work, now apparently building some kind of communication device from spare replicator parts. "Sir," Pitt ventured carefully, "the Earth databases mentioned something about honey badgers being tool users. Perhaps we should have paid more attention to that particular detail." "Tool users?" Vex laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that suggested he was one step away from a complete nervous breakdown. "Pip, that creature just reverse-engineered our quantum replication technology and improved it. That's not tool use, that's applied physics." The honey badger's communication device crackled to life, and suddenly the cafeteria was filled with what sounded like voices from Earth, human voices, speaking in excited, rapid-fire English about something called wildlife rehabilitation and problem-solving enrichment activities. Are those Earth scientists?" Captain Stormwind asked, her professional curiosity overriding her tactical concerns. The honey badger made a sound that might have been confirmation, then began operating its improvised communication system with the skill of a professional broadcaster. The voices from Earth became clearer, and suddenly everyone in the cafeteria could hear detailed discussions about honey badger intelligence, adaptability, and what humans apparently called 0F's given syndrome. "Dr. Thornbottom," one of the Earth voices was saying, "you really should have consulted with our wildlife experts before attempting to contain a honey badger. They're escape artists of the highest order, with problem-solving abilities that rival some primates." Vex's face went through several interesting color changes. You mean humans actually understand these creatures?" "Of course we do," another Earth voice chimed in. "We've been studying them for decades. Honey badgers are incredibly intelligent, adaptable, and persistent. They can solve complex puzzles, use tools, and they absolutely do not give up when they encounter obstacles." The honey badger looked directly at Vex and made a sound that was definitely approval. Then it began working on what appeared to be a holographic display system, somehow managing to project images of Earth wildlife in action. Honey badgers opening locks, solving mazes, and demonstrating the kind of problem-solving abilities that would have impressed a team of engineers. "But the Galactic Wildlife Institute's reports said," Vex began weakly. "The Institute's reports were based on observational data without consultation with the native experts," Captain Stormwind interrupted, her tone suggesting that heads were going to roll in the Institute's upper management. "You dismissed human expertise as primitive superstition." The honey badger had apparently finished its demonstration. It turned off the communication device, picked up its cappuccino, and walked calmly over to where Vex was hiding behind his barricade. The two stared at each other for a long moment, and Vex realized he was looking into the eyes of a creature that had just systematically demolished every assumption he'd ever made about evolutionary superiority. I think I may have made some errors in my initial assessment," Vex admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The honey badger tilted its head as if considering whether this apology was sufficient. Then it reached into the modified food replicator and produced what appeared to be a perfectly crafted alien pastry, which it placed carefully on the floor in front of Vex. Is that a peace offering?" Pip asked in amazement. The honey badger looked back at him with an expression that clearly said, "What do you think?" Then it settled down with its cappuccino and began what appeared to be a patient waiting game. "I think," Captain Stormwind said slowly, "it's waiting for a formal apology." Vex looked at the pastry, then at the honey badger, then at the ruins of his professional reputation scattered around the cafeteria. He cleared his throat and spoke in the voice of someone who had just learned the most expensive lesson of his career. "To the honey badger, and by extension, to all Earth wildlife and the humans who study them, I formally apologize for my arrogant dismissal of your capabilities. You are clearly far more intelligent, adaptable, and resourceful than I gave you credit for." The honey badger considered this for a moment, then made a sound that might have been acceptance. It finished its cappuccino, gave Vex one last look that seemed to say, "Don't let it happen again," and then calmly walked toward the door. "Where is it going?" Flux asked nervously. The honey badger paused at the doorway and looked back at them all with what could only be described as a satisfied expression. Then it disappeared into the corridor, leaving behind the sound of its claws clicking against the floor, but this time, the rhythm sounded almost cheerful. 3 weeks later, the Cosmic Curiosity limped into the space dock above Kepler Station, looking like it had been through a blender operated by a caffeinated tornado. The repair crews took one look at the damage reports and immediately demanded hazard pay, overtime compensation, and therapy coverage. Dr. Vex Thornbottom stood in the cargo bay, watching as the honey badger was carefully transferred to a luxury habitat that would have made most five-star hotels jealous. The creature had spent the journey back designing improvements to the ship's systems, teaching the crew about Earth wildlife behavior, and somehow managing to fix the coffee machine that had been broken for 3 years. "Are you sure it wants to return to Earth?" Captain Stormwind asked, observing the honey badger's apparent contentment with its temporary quarters. "It seems to have developed a fondness for our technology." The honey badger looked up from what appeared to be a detailed schematic it had drawn for improving the ship's navigation system. It made a sound that was definitely affirmative, then pointed toward the Earth transport vessel with one claw while holding up what looked like a business card made from repurposed alien materials. "I think it's saying it has consulting opportunities back home," Pip translated, his voice filled with the kind of wonder that came from watching a creature rewrite the laws of physics through sheer determination. Vex stepped forward, his new humility evident in every movement. "I want to formally thank you for teaching me that intelligence comes in many forms. The Galactic Wildlife Institute will be completely restructuring our research protocols based on your demonstration." The honey badger tilted its head thoughtfully, then walked over to Vex's personal quarters and disappeared inside. Moments later, it emerged, carrying what appeared to be a perfectly wrapped package, which it placed at Vex's feet, with the solemnity of a graduation ceremony. "What is it?" Vex asked, carefully unwrapping the package under the watchful eyes of the entire crew. Inside was a beautifully crafted datapad containing what appeared to be a comprehensive field guide to Earth wildlife, complete with detailed behavioral notes, threat assessments, and what looked suspiciously like sarcastic commentary in the margins. The title page read, "A Practical Guide to Not Underestimating Earth's Wildlife, a Collaborative Effort by Various Unimpressed Earth Creatures." "It wrote a book," Pip whispered in amazement. "The honey badger wrote an entire field guide." Vex flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with each entry. The section on house cats included 17 different ways they could psychologically manipulate their owners. The chapter on squirrels contained detailed architectural plans for defeating squirrel-proof bird feeders. The rabbit section featured a mathematical formula for population growth that would have impressed university statisticians. This is incredibly comprehensive," Vex admitted, his voice filled with genuine respect. "The behavioral insights alone could revolutionize our understanding of adaptive intelligence." The honey badger made a sound that might have been, "You're welcome," then began walking toward the Earth transport. The other animals, the cats, squirrels, and rabbits, had apparently been having similar educational experiences with the crew, and were now following their unofficial leader with the dignified air of professors concluding a successful lecture series. "Wait," Captain Stormwind called out. "Will we see you again?" The honey badger paused at the transport door and looked back at the assembled crew. It reached into its modified carrying pouch and produced what appeared to be a small communication device, which it tossed to Pip with casual accuracy. "I think it's saying we can call if we need consulting services," Pip said, examining the device with reverence. The honey badger nodded, then made a gesture that was unmistakably a salute. It boarded the transport with the other animals, but not before leaving one final surprise. "Dr. Thornbottom," Commander Flux called out, "you might want to check your quarters." Vex hurried to his room, followed by the curious crew. Inside, they found that the honey badger had completely redecorated the space with what appeared to be a sophisticated environmental control system, improved lighting, and a coffee maker that was somehow better than anything in the ship's original design. On the desk was a note written in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "For the alien who learned that intelligence isn't about advanced technology, it's about never giving up. The coffee maker is programmed with 17 different Earth beverages. The hot chocolate setting is particularly good. It left me a housewarming gift," Vex said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything I put it through, it left me a gift." 3 months later, Dr. Vex Thornbottom stood before the Galactic Wildlife Institute's board of directors, delivering what would become known as the Honey Badger Lecture, a comprehensive presentation on the dangers of cultural and evolutionary prejudice in xenobiology. "In conclusion," Vex said, looking directly at the assembled alien scientists, "I propose we adopt a new motto for our research. Never underestimate a planet's wildlife, especially the small, fluffy ones who might be smarter than you think." The board approved the motion unanimously, partly because of the compelling evidence, and partly because the honey badger had somehow managed to hack into their communication systems and was currently displaying holographic images of Earth wildlife looking distinctly unimpressed with the proceedings. Pip, now promoted to senior research coordinator, leaned over to whisper in Vex's ear, "Sir, I think our consultant wants to add something to the presentation." On the main display, the honey badger's image flickered and was replaced by a simple message in elegant script. "Remember, intelligence isn't about having the biggest brain or the most advanced technology. It's about never giving up, always adapting, and occasionally making really good coffee." The message was signed with a small paw print and what appeared to be a smiley face. Dr. Vex Thornbottom smiled, raised his cup of perfectly brewed Earth coffee, and toasted the empty space where a small, determined creature had taught an entire galaxy that sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. And somewhere on Earth, a honey badger was probably solving another impossible problem, completely unbothered by the fact that it had just revolutionized galactic wildlife research. Because, as the humans say, honey badgers don't give a single solitary damn about your expectations.